Foundation of civilization, from the foundation of the use of an element called time, called a day, called a month, called a year. From the foundation of civilization up to this time zone, everything laid down and created was done by the black man. Everything, all right? Mathematics, science, medicine, architecture, building, craftsmanship, making jewelry, making clothes, building with brick, stone, houses, cutting logs and making boats, rowing, fishing, everything in civilization. Everything in civilization, all right? That existed from the beginning of time all the way up to a time certain. We know when the white man shows up and starts messing with people.
Yes.
We know when that date was. But from the foundation up until this time period, everything done on this earth, done in terms of in the name of civilization in this area. Foundation of civilization. Again, let me not forget my brothers and sisters in the Americas and in China. But everything done here at the beginning of the foundation of this time zone, the original, everything, the cornerstone for the word culture and civilization is the black man. Everything. All right? Mathematics, science, medicine, architecture, building, craftsmanship. And there's some things that makes you angry when you get as much knowledge and understand that you've been bamboozled. 'Tis 4 weeks before Christmas, and all through this house, the brothers are rapping, separating truth from lies. We're going to take a historical trip back through time and look at the origin of the day that most of our people are getting ready to celebrate. This is holiday time. In fact, what is today called holidays has historically been called holy days. But the church, in its attempt to bring more people under its influence, decided to split the meaning of the word and make holy day apply to days set aside to celebrate events relating to the church, and holidays are days people take off to celebrate what they call their continued heathen practices. So we're going to look at this day called Christmas. All right. Chief among the holidays or holy days celebrated in the Western civilization is Christmas, a day set aside by the church, and as the church tells its members that its icon, the individual that it is organized around, was born on this day. That is Jesus of Nazareth. The one thing that the church can't come to grip with, that all historians and intelligent people of the world know, is that Jesus of Nazareth was not born on December 25th. Even though that's the date that's set aside for his celebration, he was not born on that date. In fact, there is so much confusion around when Jesus of Nazareth was born, if in fact there was a Jesus of Nazareth, that the churches themselves are split over this concept into a Western Orthodox Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church views on the subject. The Western Orthodox Church states Jesus of Nazareth was born on December the 25th, and all its celebrations are aligned with that date. However, the Eastern Orthodox Church states that Jesus was born on January the 6th. And the difference between December the 25th and January the 6th is what's called the 12 days of Christmas, between the two dates. But let's look at this date. Originally, December the 25th was celebrated as the birth date of the sun, S-U-N. I'll state it again. December 25th, historically, was celebrated as the birth date of the sun. In fact, at the time that Christianity was forming itself into an official religion, there were 15 other religions around the Mediterranean basin which celebrated the birth date of the sun on December the 25th. And as the church itself became organized, the Christian church became the 16th religion to celebrate the birth date of its S-O-N, Son of God, on December the 25th. But what we're dealing with on December the 25th is an astronomical event. Today, as it has been from time immemorial, the Earth tilts on its axis approximately 23 degrees from the winter solstice to the summer solstice. That is, on June the 21st, the North Pole is tilted at its most extreme angle toward the sun. That's called the summer solstice. On December the 25th, 6 months later, the North Pole is tilted on an extreme angle away from the sun. That's called the winter solstice, as such. Now, the sun probably was the most important thing in existence to the people of the ancient world. They saw it as their life giver, its sustainer. They saw the light of the sun as their savior, as such. And as such, on December the 21st, what actually occurs as the Earth reaches its most extreme angle, that is the North Pole, and tilting away from the sun, it takes about 3 days before the North Pole began to move back toward the summer solstice in its most extreme angle toward the sun. And for those 3 days, that is the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th, the ancients would measure the movement of the sun by what they call sundials or tall erect poles, where they could actually see the shadow of the sun moving around. And for those 3 days, the shadows of the sun, the shadows caused by the sun being cast on the poles, didn't appear to lengthen. In fact, they appeared to stay still. So the ancients symbolically said the sun was dead for those 3 days. And on the next day, when the sun began, that is the North Pole, as the Earth is moving back in its tilting angle, it began to move. They could actually measure the shadows lengthening again. And it's that event, the lengthening of the shadows, that caused the ancients to celebrate what they call the rebirth of the sun god. Now, as such, the ancients had a symbol, an icon that they used, all right, to represent this event. And what I'm going to do at this point is show you a picture of the icon. It's a very, very, very important picture for you to look at. Now, as the camera is being focused on this icon, what you actually see is a baby that's laying in a box. Now, this baby is wrapped in swaddling clothes, or it's wrapped in swaddling patches of linen, which is used to mummify one. Now, the baby's head is exposed, and there is what appears to be a halo-like aura around the baby's head. And that is symbolic. Now, this symbol is symbolic of the baby son being reborn on the 25th of December. And I think if you look very closely, by the way, this symbol you'll find carved in stone on the walls of the temples that are at least 7,000 years old, or 5,000 years older than Jesus of Nazareth or the Christian religion. And what is very interesting about this symbol is, if you note the mythology around the birth of Jesus of Nazareth, it is said that he was born and laid in a manger and wrapped in swaddling clothes. Now, a manger, by the way, is a wooden box. It's a wooden box that one feeds stable animals out of, cows, horses, donkeys, what have you. But this baby wrapped in mummified form in a wooden box is what the ancient Egyptians call their Christ. And they spelled it K-R-S-T. This is the glow around his head. They said this this is the anointed one. They're talking about it as the son that's reborn on December the 25th. Now, this symbol was worshipped for 5,000 years before the Western Church said Jesus of Nazareth was born. As such. So the time period, worshiping and having fun and partying for the concept of the rebirth of the Son of God is at least 5,000 years older than what the Western Church will tell us. And as black people, it is very important for us to note that this is one of our original holy days, celebrating this event. The difference between our celebration, of course, and the celebration of Jesus of Nazareth is with the invention of the Western Church. They are claiming that in 5,000 years of black history prior to their event, that this was just an idea or a concept. The Christ was an idea or a concept in the minds of man. So in the black world order, when we had our celebrations, we were celebrating an idea of the rebirth of the sun god. But with the advent of their church, they are stating, or with the birth of Jesus of Nazareth, that the holy event, which is carved on the walls of the temples of Egypt, actually became real and took place in humanity. And a little baby was born to one Mary and one Joseph, whom they named Jesus, and this is the Son of God. As such. So the history of Christmas, the Mass for this Christ, officially began in the Catholic Church, ordered by Pope Julius I in 366 AD. However, before that time, in fact, even during that time that this was taking place, the largest holiday that was being celebrated by most of the people of the Mediterranean world was the rebirth of the sun god. And this sun god had many names in different lands. In fact, as Kersey says in his book, The World's 16 Crucified Saviors, that we have one idea that is being celebrated in different places in different forms. And there's an answer for that. For again, on the walls of the temple at Kimanu, there's an instruction that what is learned here, this is an address to the graduates or the adepts who are leaving this school, that their job is to go out into the world and teach this one truth to other peoples in their language and in their culture so that they could understand it. In other words, the Egyptian idea, when taken to Babylon, or when taken to Syria, or when taken to Rome, or when taken to Greece, one idea, one truth, but it is now taught in the language and the culture of those people so that they could understand it. So that now we have Mithra, we have Bacchus, we have Adonai, we have these other Christ or saviors, as they are known, and there are different customs or different rituals that are associated with celebrating those saviors in those countries, because those people had different cultures, but it's one central idea. And the original central idea is the concept of the Christ, the original concept of the Christ as an Egyptian idea. By the way, by the time we get to Greece, by the time the Greeks come into Egypt in 332 BC, they changed the Egyptian Christ, KRST, to the concept of Christos. Same term. And then the English form of the word Christos is the word Christ. So this is how the word grows as such. All right? Now, the astronomical event, as I said, that I was talking about, was symbolically represented in the Nile Valley for 5,000 years prior to the Western Church saying that these ideas applied to one Jesus of Nazareth. Now, the ancient Egyptians, as our people today, had a tendency of using words more in a symbolic form than in a straight literal form. If I were to tell you today that a sister's head is fried, dyed, and laid on the side, right? I'm using symbolic language. I'm not talking about a cannibalistic people who eat fried heads.
Yeah.
What I am saying is a young lady had her hair permed, straightened, that's fried. Has had it recolored. You've seen these blonde sisters walking around the streets, right? And has it styled. So fried, dyed, and laid on the side is one whose hair has been permed, colored, and styled. But instead of using that term as a creative people, especially our young folk as creative people, we use symbolic language to relay the exact same thing. The most popular form of music today by our young folk is called hip-hop. Hip-hop is complete with symbolic use of language. In fact, I can't understand some of the terminology that young folk are using today because they're using terms symbolically and not literally. But anyway, that's the nature of how the ancient Egyptians conveyed their ideas, their concepts. These see, an idea is an abstract thing. It exists in the abstract world. And how do you make an abstraction concrete? How do you make it material? Well, the ancients did it by making these ideas people and talking about these ideas as if these were people interacting with each other. Therefore, you have Osiris, you have Isis, you have Horus. Horus is the sun itself. Horus is represented as the solar disk. Horus is represented as the golden hawk who flies back and forth from the solar disk. Horus is represented as the little baby sitting on his mother's knee. Horus is represented as the first icon of the Madonna and child. Horus is the child. But Horus in this instance is the sun. Isis is heaven itself. She's the queen of heaven, but she is heaven. So her son, the sun, the S-O-N of heaven is the S-U-N. These are the ancient Egyptian concepts. All right. We all know that with the advent of the coming of the Greeks into the Nile Valley in 332 BC, the Greeks began to get the priests of Egypt to translate or transliterate its religious concepts into Greek so that they could understand it. And in doing this, in translating both the writings on the walls of the temples, the writings on their papyrus into Greek for the Greeks to read it, we end up with a set of documents written by these priests that are called the Coptic documents. In fact, the use of the term Coptic, by the way, which means the priests of Memphis, were called Coptics because the Egyptian term for Memphis is Kapita, or Kapita, K-A-P-T-A-H, Kapita, the house of Pita, the soul of Pita, right? And so these Coptic documents written by one priest whose name is Tehuti Ma'atiu, another priest whose name was A'an. By the way, Ma'atiu in English is Matthew. A'an in English is John. So two of the founding documents of the four Gospels were written by Egyptian priests, which had been given European names as such, right? So we understand the foundation of what we call Christianity. But at any rate, during this time of December the 25th, as I said, the ancient world was all celebrating different holidays. Now, in Rome, the big empire, at the time that Christianity is born officially in the Western world, we have a holiday being celebrated that was called Saturnalia. Now, Saturnalia was a holiday in honor of Saturn, the god of agriculture. And the reason it was celebrated on during this time period is that once the shadows began to re-lengthen again, the ancients knew that the spring season would soon be coming when they could start farming, planting their foods for the spring, planting their foods for the harvest in the fall. Therefore, they celebrated Saturnalia. And the Saturnalia celebration historically has been called one of the most hedonistic celebrations of the ancient world. And for those who don't understand the term hedonistic, it's one of pure sexual idolatry. Slaves and poor people were allowed to interact with the ruling class. In a home, the slaves took the seats of the masters, and the masters took the place of the servants and served them things of this nature. And even to the degree that men and women, slaves who wanted to have sexual relations with their masters could do so during this time period. There was a lot of drinking, a lot of revelry, as it's called, a lot of what's called raucousness took place during this time period of the Saturnalia. And in addition to the Saturnalia being celebrated, the Romans also celebrated the rebirth of the one of the gods of Rome, Sol Invictus. Now, Sol Invictus, Sol, S-O-L-E, is the sun, the invincible sun. And the invincible sun's birth date is December the 25th in Rome. That's right. So the people were already celebrating, see, the rebirth of the sun, that is spelled S-U-N, the Son of God. And it was real easy to get these people to change the term celebration of the Son of God, S-U-N, to the celebrating of the birth of the Son, S-O-N, of God. Yeah. See, they just changed the same phonetic sound, the same sound value, right? But they changed the spelling. And the changing of the spelling is the flim-flam. See, the changing of the spelling is the scam. In order for the church to raise itself to a position of prominence, saying, no, we're going to get away from the pagan practices of worshiping the idol, solar disk up in the sky. And we want you to start worshiping this little baby that was born in Bethlehem to one Mary and Joseph that no one had ever heard of up until this time and such, right? In fact, as the church itself came into existence, the church didn't celebrate Christmas. See, the church's only holiday at its inception was the celebration of what they called Easter, or the resurrection of Christ, not the birth of Christ, because they had no idea or clue from anyone or anywhere when the Christ was born. In fact, in the writings of Matthew and in the writings of Luke, those are the two books of what's called the New Testament of Christianity that documents the birth of Jesus of Nazareth. They don't give any clue other than shepherds were in the field when an angel appeared to them and said, "Hark, the Lord is born," right? Mm-hmm. And most people will tell you that in Palestine, during this time of the year, it is very cold, and it is very doubtful that shepherds were out in the field attending anything. Shepherds don't attend flocks in the winter outside, so that's just another bit of history. But anyway, but this holiday, this date, December the 25th, originally is a date of celebration of the sun, big red, the big ball up in the sky that we see every day. That was what was being celebrated in the ancient days. It was celebrated for, like I said, at least 5,000 years prior to the church inventing the celebration for the birth of the S-O-N, Son of God, as such. So, in my mind, when you look at the picture, the icon of the ancient people's Christ, you see the baby wrapped in swaddling clothes, laying in a manger, or laying in a box, as such, right? And we know where the Catholic Church borrowed their concepts that they would put on the icon that they had named Jesus of Nazareth, as such. If that's not convincing enough, let's look at some other aspects of this holiday that's in the practice that has nothing to do with the birth of the Son of God, as such, but it's still very much a part of the birth. It's still very much a part of the astronomical event of the winter solstice. And the first thing we're going to take a look at is the thing called the tree, or the Christmas tree. Now, trees being part of the winter solstice celebration, where does that come into play? Well, let's go way back to the Nile Valley. First of all, we can trace for at least 2,000 years prior to the church adopting this date for the birth date of the Son of God, right? At least going back to 2000 BC, we find papyrus, paintings, and statements that the Egyptian people would decorate their homes with green palm leaves for the rebirth of of Horus, the sun god. All right. We also find that in Rome, for the rebirth of the sun god, Sol Invictus, all right, that they decorated their homes with fir trees and such, greenery again. And the greenery, and by the way, Saturnalia, as I said earlier, is the Roman them God of vegetation. See, and so what they are celebrating by putting the green tree in the house, they are celebrating the knowledge that spring is coming, when everything would green back up, when they could plant their crops right and food would be growing again. So it's a vegetation holiday, or it's the observation of the fact that vegetation will be coming back again. Is what part of this the celebration is, as such, in terms of Saturnalia. So we have the Christmas tree, or we have the December 25th tree. I won't call it Christmas. The December 25th tree is being celebrated or used in both Egypt and in Rome. Now, with the Roman Empire spreading all the way up to the forest of German, right, the German tribes that had come underneath the Roman influence, the German peoples, where in their winter, you have a lot of fir trees. You have the spruce, you have the pine tree, all type of winter trees that are green and such, right? These German peoples also celebrated the fact that spring would be coming back after this point by decorating their homes with green fir trees and such. So the Christmas tree had nothing to do with Jesus of Nazareth, but it's what the church would call a pagan or heathen icon that's in the homes. In fact, at one time, the church outlawed all of this stuff. You know, the fact that it's back with us again is very interesting. And the fact that in churches today, you find everything we're talking about, the Christmas tree, Santa Claus, mistletoe, all that stuff are in churches now. The church not only made a compromise with it, they've become a part of these pagan or heathen celebrations by having the icons of those pagan and heathen celebrations as part of their celebration for their real Son of God, as such. We can even go back further and add the Yule log. Now, the Yule log, the Yule log comes from a ritual known as Yuletide, which was a pagan festival of fire, and this festival used the burning of the log, all right, to denote. They used the burning of the log to denote the power of the sun that is being reborn and such, right? And they would light this log on the night of December the 24th, or what they call the winter solstice eve. No, I'm sorry, the rebirth, not winter solstice eve, but the rebirth eve, right? Now, the day traditionally, I'm sorry, it was the winter solstice eve. Pardon me for a minute. That is on the December the 20th, the eve before the longest night and the shortest day. That's when the log was lit, right? And again, it was lit there and would burn throughout the holiday through the rebirth of the sun. So from the solstice itself through the morning of the rebirth of the sun, God itself, we're dealing with Big Red, right? This log is burnt. And by the way, the word Yule derives its name from the Norse word U-L-E is Yule. But the Norse word is Y-U-L. Y-U-L-E is Yule. The Norse word is Y-U-L or J-U-L, and it means wheel. All right, and the wheel is symbolic of the movement of the sun itself through what we call the 12 houses of the zodiac as such, right? The 12 months is getting ready to go through those 12 mansions as such, right? That's the wheel, you know, like, and so lighting of this log was symbolic of the sun getting ready to start its annual journey through this circle. Now, the Celtic Druids, they also had a solar festival in which a log was burnt after dinner, all right? And again, it was burnt after dinner on the eve of the rebirth of the sun. So we're dealing with the solar disk. We're not dealing with a baby born to a woman at this point, right? In terms of what the symbols that are being used in the holiday actually represent. Another symbol that is used quite a bit in the celebrations of Christmas in several societies around the world is that of hanging this plant called mistletoe. Now, mistletoe is odd. Now, to get the people of what they call the northern realm, the Norse people, the Scandinavian people, the northern peoples of Russia, to get those people to come into the realms of Christianity, what the church actually did was make a compromise with these pagans and decided to bring some of their practices under the umbrella of Christianity, or they Christianize the pagan practice, and made it legitimate as such, right? And the just a very short history of mistletoe. Again, in the Norse mythology, or the Northern people's mythology, the goddess Frigga. Now, Frigga is, by the way, is the goddess of which the day Friday of the week is named after. It's Frigga Day, Frigga Day. That's named after her as such, right? But a lot of people don't know that.
I didn't.
We do all these pagan things, all these heathen things. We continue these European practices, right? And not even know them. But at any rate, Frigga, allegedly when her son Baldur is born, right, she makes a declaration. She tells all the people, all the plants, all the animals that this is her son and that nobody and nothing can bring harm to him, right? And one of her adversaries, the trickster, the Norse god of the trickster, right, his name is Loki. Loki decided to have Baldur killed. And so he tricked one of the other lesser gods into fashioning an arrow out of mistletoe and had him shoot Baldur with it. And this killed Baldur, right? Frigga was so upset that her son was killed, right? That what she declared from that point forward, that mistletoe could never be used for evil again. It would only be used for love. And so out of that mythology, right, the Norse people would hang mistletoe up, and when people meet under the mistletoe, they kiss as such. So again, in your homes on the 25th of December, and the homes of a lot of people on the 25th of December, you're going to see this little plant growing, which comes out of Norse mythology, right, about a son being killed with an arrow made out of this. It has nothing to do with the Son of God, either the solar disk Son of God or with Jesus of Nazareth. But yet, this heathen practice has been brought into the religious practices of Christianity.
Right.
And I'm sure in some churches, you will probably have mistletoe hanging also, even though people not married not supposed to be kissing anybody in the church or anywhere else, right? We find all those things. And one last thing, going back to the poem, The Night Before Christmas, and Washington Irving's short stories about Christmas. All of these occurred in the early 1800s. In fact, by the way, you know, the New York City Police Department was created because of the 1828 Christmas riot in New York City, as such, right? Where the poor people who were so upset they didn't have nothing and what have you, they went on a rampage, y'all, you know, and messed up the merchants and things, right? They was taking stuff. I'm talking about a riot. But it was a riot where they took stuff from merchants. So the merchants came back with the idea of getting the New York City government to officially organize a police force to protect them. And then Christmas, among everything else, after the writing of the poems, especially that poem of by Moore of the night before Christmas, the Christmas Carol, I think it's called, in 1822, the merchants decided to take this holiday and broaden it in order to increase their sales. So instead of this date being a holy day, see, they pushed it as a holiday. Right. And as a holiday, it's a merchant's day. And so it's the merchants that came back and brought all of these elements out of the pagan practices of Europeans to put it together to make this a holiday for themselves. So this is a commercial holiday that is celebrated at the time that the world has always celebrated the fact that the earth has begun its 6 months journey back toward the sun, in which we will reach the summer solstice and the period when the earth gets warm again. One last thing, going back to the tree, the mistletoe, the Yule log as such, right? Now all of these are icons of what we call astronomy, not astrology, astronomy, and we're dealing with the seasonal change. That is the fact that spring is only 90 days away after the sun is reborn. Then when spring comes, everything will green back up. Therefore, we're going to celebrate these things. And so for all of the wreaths, the Christmas wreaths that you see hanging in streets and shopping centers, for all of those of you who have them hanging on your doors, whether they are green, made out of aluminum foil, or made out of white fuzzy snowball dust, you know, whatever you do to create your wreath, right? Again, the wreath, even though they are colorful today, are representative of the tree. It's the same thing as the tree, your home's being decorated in something green, or being decorated with green palm leaves like they did in ancient Egypt as such, right? It's a declaration that you are making, all right, to the heathen gods of the ancient world as such. Has nothing to do with the birth of a Jesus of Nazareth as such, even though a lot of people think so. Mm-hmm. Now the funniest character of all in addressing the celebration of Christmas is the one known as Santa Claus. I have a thing, an old lecture I used to do where I said, Santa Claus is Satan's cause, and Satan's cause is Santa Claus. And why do we say this? In the book of Matthew, it is said that man can't have two masters. You're going to love the one and hate the other, right? You can't, in other words, if you can't love God, which is spirit, and mammon, which is materialism and such, right? Well, the odd thing is this that you people are doing on Christmas, and I want you to stop and think about this very, very, very carefully. If you are indeed celebrating the birth of God in the flesh, God's own Son here on earth, which is a spiritual thing, and you know that spiritualism and materialism are in direct conflict with each other, how can you have your children go sit on Santa's lap and lie to him in good faith? I've been a good boy all year. I want a bicycle. I've been a good girl all year. I want a baby doll. Here you have your children lying to this person who represents Santa to get material reward on Christmas Day. Mm-hmm. Now, isn't that some type of conflict? Oh, no, you don't see it that way. It's just the imagination, and kids need to have the imagination developed. That's what you've been trained to say. But let's look at where this guy Santa comes from. The legend of Santa Claus really goes back to, it's a European legend that stretches back to what was supposed to have been a saint of the Catholic Church, born in Turkey about 280 A.D. And this was supposed to have been a priest who went around doing good and giving little poor kids gifts and food and things of this nature. This was Saint Nicholas. He was a guy of love, so they made him a saint as such. Now, oddly enough, today Saint Nicholas has been de-sainted. He's been wiped out by the Catholic Church. There's no longer a Saint Nicholas in the Catholic Church, because doing their own research, they said, hey, look, we just can't go along with this flim-flam forever. We know this one is a scam. So it wasn't no St. Nicholas, so we're no longer going to authorize St. Nicholas, even though, again, in a lot of churches you still see the icon of this person called Santa Claus. But anyway, old St. Nicholas and Santa Claus were made to be one person. But in other countries like Switzerland, he was called Chris Kind. In Germany, he was called Chris Kringle. By the way, and they say that Chris Kringle means Christ child or Christ kind. It's kind of strange what they're saying about it. In Scandinavia, a jolly elf named Joe Tutman was thought to deliver gifts in a sleigh drawn by goats. The English legends explains that Father Christmas visits each home on Christmas Eve to fill children's stockings with holiday gifts. Peter Noel, which is French, responsible for filling the shoes of French children, right? In Russia, it is believed that an elderly woman named Babushka purposely gave the wise men wrong directions in Bethlehem so they couldn't find Jesus. Later, she felt bad but could not find the wise men to undo her damage. So to this day, on January 5th, Babushka visits Russian children, leaving gifts at their bedsides in hope that one of them is the baby Jesus and she will be forgiven. Kind of silly, huh? In Italy, a similar story exists about a woman called La Bafna, a kindly witch who rides a broomstick down the chimney of Italian homes to deliver toys into the stockings of lucky children. Lot of pagan and heathen practices, right? Yeah. But in 1822, Clement Clark Moore, an Episcopalian minister, right, wrote a long Christmas poem for his 3 daughters entitled An Account of a Visit from St. Nicholas. Now, Moore's poem, which he was hesitant to publish, is largely responsible for our modern image of Santa Claus, right, as a right jolly old elf, and with a supernatural ability to ascend up a chimney with a mere nod of his head. What I'm talking about is "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" poem, right? That poem set the stage for how most modern people today still practice Christmas. Before 1822, see that you didn't have this concept. You just had those earlier ones I had mentioned, you know, like the Swiss Kris Kringle, the German Chris Kine, Babushka, you know, and those other personalities, right? In other words, in the different cultures, the people found a way during the winter solstice to give people gifts, continuing the old Roman Empire practice of Saturnalia, right? By the way, when you wanted to, something I left out earlier, is during the Saturnalia festival, right? The heathenism and what have you. See, anybody you want to interact with, you gave them a gift, be it male, female, or child. You gave them a gift. And so this continuing of giving of a gift goes back to this practice in the Roman Empire, practicing this Saturnalia as such. Now, those who oppose the celebration of Christmas point to the medieval compromise of the church to bring in the heathen practices by Christianizing their customs. In other words, from its foundation in 325 AD, right up through about 1500, the church continually legitimized these practices that they had been preaching against. See, if in fact the Son of God, born in spirit to man, you know, like to come and save the world and do all those things, it's, you know, like celebrating his birth would be enough. Right. You know, like, therefore, since he has arrived, there is no need to continue these heathen practices that believe that the Son is a person and his rebirth meant something to the earth and all these other things and such, right? So the church preached against this stuff. But the church very slowly, as I said earlier, in order to bring more people under its umbrella of influence, made compromises with those heathen practices and legitimized the heathen practices by Christianizing them. Therefore, we find them in the practice of a holiday to this date. The last thing I'd like to go over on the practice of Christmas, I think I said I talked about the tree. I talked about old Saint Nick himself. An important thing in this country, a lot of people don't know. That is when the Pilgrims left England. They were actually called Puritans, all right? And in the early 17th century, in the early 1600s, there began to be this Protestant Reformation really taking root in England. And it reached such an extent that the one Oliver Cromwell and the Puritan forces of England took over England. They ruled England for a while. They pulled a coup d'etat. And when they pulled a coup d'etat and made Charles ineffective, they outlawed Christmas. You know, like in all of those heathen practices as such, right? But believe it or not, a few years later, Charles was able to muster his forces together. And the reason Charles I came back to the throne of England has more to do with the fact that the masses of people wanted to go back to their celebrations and didn't want to live under this strict rule of these English Puritans, Oliver Cromwell and his boys. So they helped Charles overthrow the Puritans and put Charles I back on the throne so they could continue their holiday practices. Now, we should all know, you remember the Thanksgiving story, because these were the same Pilgrims, Puritans, who came to America, right? They had the celebration we had, in the November celebration, the Thanksgiving joint. Now, when these cats got here, Christmas was outlawed in America. Christmas could not be practiced as such, right? In fact, it was actually after 1681 that other settlers in other colonies began to actually practice Christmas as such. In fact, after the American Revolution, when, of course, the colonies broke away from England, right, the United States Congress was in session on December the 25th of 1789 as such. So it wasn't a big thing. It wasn't a holiday. And it really wasn't until later on in the 19th century, in the 1800s, that Americans began to embrace Christmas. In fact, it is said that Americans reinvented Christmas, or Americans invented the modern Christmas as such, right? And thanks mainly to two people. One, in 1819, was a gentleman named Washington Irving. He was a novelist or a writer as such, and he wrote a book called The Sketchbook of Jeffrey Crayon. And in this sketchbook, he wrote a lot of short stories about how Christmas was being celebrated in England, in an English mansion as such. And so the lighting of tree, the decorating, you know, like the mansion with holly and mistletoe, and with wreaths that were the greenery that was left over from cutting down the trees, and the branches fall off the pine trees or the fir trees. See, they used the branches and put them in a circle and tied them together, so they would be additional decorations. And most of this comes from this writer, Washington Irving's book on how to celebrate Christmas as such. And the second book that was written is a book that was written in 1822. Actually, it was a poem written in 1822 by an Episcopalian minister named Clement Clark Moore, who wrote a Christmas poem. And you've all heard of it, "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." See, and in doing, and when he wrote his poem, Moore synthesizes all of these European Kris Kringles and Christ Kind and all these characters, right, into a different kind of a person. See, he makes him an elf, a jolly elf, right, in a red suit with a white beard. And instead of his sled being drawn by goats, he gives him reindeer, you know, things of this nature. But he wrote this poem to entertain his daughters. But in doing so, there are a lot of what's called Masonic symbolism in his poem also. And he was afraid to publish it for that reason. So it was just a poem for his daughters, but yet the poem got out. And of course, you know, the story later, it's become an American icon in terms of what and how to celebrate Christmas. So from the mid-1800s forward, Christmas, the idea of Christmas, and all of its decorations and all of its, what I call chicanery, right, was basically based on the writings of these two Americans on how to celebrate what was supposed to be a holy day. But it's one other thing here we have to look at. These poems and the idea of these two men were primarily being pushed by the American merchants, not by the American churches as such, right? Because the American merchants found a way to make money out of the holiday. And so what is supposed to be, or what was allegedly created to be a holy day to celebrate the birth of the Son of God, evolved into a holiday, not a holy day, right? In order for the merchants to make in order to make a lot of money. In fact, we find to this day, you will hear it all the time, that most businesses that sell products as such, that are bought, you know, like for people, make most of their money in December. Right. But in fact, a new term that was invented a few years ago, I don't know if you ever heard of it, but from what is now called Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, see, all the way up to January, the January post-Christmas sales, all right, is the most profitable time for Western businesses. So in the end, Christmas ends up being a commercial merchant holiday that has been substituted for the churches stolen holy day, right, in which they wanted to deify the concept of their Savior, Jesus of Nazareth, and placing his birth date on the day that the ancient peoples always worshiped the sun, as such, right? So Christmas, for all practical purposes, still to this day, is a celebration of the beginning of the earth making its tilt back toward the sun itself, toward the summer solstice, as such, the coming of spring, and it's all symbolic, as opposed to the mythology created by the Western Church that God, the creator of the universe, in all of its infinite wisdom, would decide on that date to himself come into the world as a little baby in order to straighten things out and to die for the sins of all man, so that mankind from that point forward would live in peace and harmony. The proof is in the pudding. Since in the last 2,000 years, some of the most vicious wars fought by mankind has been fought, a lot of them under the banner of this church. Yes. All right? So obviously, the idea of the Romans and the Greeks and the Jewish, the Greek Jews who decided to steal the original ideas from the ancient Nile Valley peoples in the first place and change it and transform it into their own use, the use hasn't worked. Man is still man. Man is still doing what mankind has always done. Most of you who proclaim to believe in what the Western Church has told you the truth is will continue to engage in your revelry. You'll be at your office parties. You'll be at house parties. You'll have your eggnog. You'll have all the things, you know, drunken, raucous behavior. Families gritting on each other, coming together, the brothers not liking the aunts, relatives still mad at each other, faking like they're getting along during this time period. All the things that human beings have done for thousands of years will continue to be practiced by people, all under the banner of the fakery, F-A-K-E-R-Y, fakery, of an idea that was created when people stole some ideas from some people and decided that they could rule and manage people by use of these ideas. That is the Western Church. The Western Church was born in the concept of wanting to manage the affairs of human beings and placing itself in between man and man's creator. See, if creation does exist. The proof is in the pudding. Since creation exists, it is logical to assume the creator exists. Someone created creation. See? Mm-hmm. But whether or not, see, the creator of the whole universe, all right, manifested itself, all right, in the concept of one Jesus of Nazareth some 2,003 years ago, see, is where intelligent people have to draw the line in the sand in terms of, and start thinking. Let's look back at the concepts of what was going on in the world order before before the white man became civilized, before he became intelligent, before he developed his Greek and Roman empires. See, the world is much older than that, and people were civilized long before that. But to decide to take the ideas of the world before the time of their coming to full intelligence, reforming those ideas into a new form, and bringing them back in order to rule and control man. That's the idea of what became the Holy Roman Empire and the Holy Roman Church as such. Like the idea that the Protestants would protest the heathen practices that the church brought in and would not question the original idea as to whether this Jesus of Nazareth is in fact the icon, is in fact the manifest God himself in human flesh. The Protestants didn't go for that examination. They just wanted to take away the physical manifestations of all of these celebrations as such, right? But it's time to look back at the truth of the matter on the historical person, Yeshua ben Padera, whom we now know as Jesus of Nazareth, and to see whether the 184 attributes that the New Testament gives to him are actually attributes of a living human being, or if those 184 attributes, which are the same 184 attributes of Horus of Egypt. See, if in fact did the event take place, or has the biggest flim-flam or the biggest lie that's ever been told continued to be perpetuated on you? See, this short history of the church, this primary celebration of Christmas, I hope will give you a better understanding of some of the things that you do. Whatever your beliefs are, whatever your practices are, rather than to continue things that have been handed down to you from tradition, excuse me, it is time that intelligent human beings take an in-depth look at the things that they do to see where they really have come from. Now, I hope that this time of year will be joyful and gleeful for you. I agree with those who say that there's a energy that comes from the sun itself when the earth is tilting back into the graces of its rays, that gives people a reason for joy and celebration, especially those of us here in the northern hemisphere when this is the winter season and it's cold and drab and dreary out. There is life, there is hope, the spring is coming, the plants will grow again, foods will be available again, everything will start afresh, and the annual renewal is well underway. And those are things to celebrate in intelligence and good sense, not just out of tradition and what's been handed down as a flim-flam. Yeah. And for us who are poor people, you'll save thousands of dollars every year. I mean, from your electric bill, from not burning all those silly lights and things decorating your homes, from all of the ornaments and these other things that you buy. I mean, all this is being done out of nothing that actually happened. And you would be, as a spiritual person, much better off dedicating your time and energy to the idea of celebrating the concept of God's Son being born, and not continuing to practice so many rituals that are associated with ancient heathen peoples who had not yet reached the full level of intelligence. Thank you very much.